Howdy ladies and gentlemen, this is the Hypersonic 55, and after all this time I am coming to you finally with my review of Thor. Now, I've seen the film several times and the review was meant to be out around mid-Easter, but I just didn't have the time to go about and get it out. So now I'm going to give you my review. Okay, so let me go about and explain the plot of Thor. So at the center of the story we have Thor, god of thunder, mighty warrior, who happens to be a very strong yet arrogant warrior, whose actions happen to lead to the reawakening of a war between the Asgardians and the frost giants, who are the enemy, who live in one of the 9 realms called Jotunheim. And because of his actions, his father Odin strips him of his powers and casts him down to earth. And while down there, Thor has to learn what it takes to be a true hero in order to gain his powers back and then eventually stop his brother Loki from causing havoc in the world of Asgard and Jotunheim. And that is basically the gist of the story. The plot of the film is an interesting one, and it is taken straight from the comics back when they were first running in the 1960s. And the reason why I like the plot so much is because rather than it being the conventional superhero story, in this story we happen to have an already established superhero who actually loses his powers and then has to get them back. The story is basically about cause and effect. What happens when your actions could jeopardize not only your friends and family but a whole race of people, and what needs to be done in order to set those things right. And it's all about the moral and ethical decisions that you make, which can either be good decisions or bad decisions. And I found the story to be really interesting. In a world of sort of conventional storylines, this one was a breath of fresh air to me, and it seemed to have a lot of different levels to it. In terms of the character development between Loki and Thor, their character dynamic as brothers, throughout the time that they are young up until their sort of adult years, and then the sort of connection that Thor has to the humans as well as the story progresses. It was all very interesting and I found it good to watch. Okay, so let's go about and talk about the actual performances of these characters. Now, Chris Hemsworth. Now, when he was first cast as Thor, I was literally just like, wow, it's that guy from Star Trek that was in the movie for 10 minutes. And I was just like, wow, that is totally sweet. I was really interested to see how Hemsworth was going to tackle the character of Thor. But when I saw him in the film, there was no doubt in my mind that Chris Hemsworth had owned the role of Thor. He comes across as the brash, arrogant, yet very likable god of thunder. He has so much tenacity and flair, fire and passion in his role. Chris Hemsworth just embodies everything that I wanted to see in Thor. He didn't dumb the role down. He was very interesting and very cool. Okay, now let's move on to the character Jane Foster, who's played by Natalie Portman. Now, I love Natalie Portman. I mean, she's a great actress, and also, she is just hot. So, not really any complaints there. Now, the interesting thing about Jane Foster's character is that, as far as I'm aware, in the comics she was a paramedic, but in the film she's been changed into a scientist. But Natalie Portman seems to embody this whole new role as a scientist in the film, with the dialogue that she's given makes it really feasible and makes us as an audience believe that she is a scientist. But overall, her and Chris Hemsworth happen to have some interesting chemistry as Jane Foster and Thor. And while I feel that in the space of 2 days for those guys to actually sort of get feelings for each other, I felt was a little short. If it was maybe 2 weeks or so, or maybe about 6 weeks, then yeah, I could understand that. But 2 days is just a little too short for me. But overall, it still looked like it worked anyway. Now we move on to the character Loki. Now, this guy is played by Tom Hiddleston, and this is an interesting character because Loki is the god of mischief. He is one of the most badass guys in the Marvel comic universe, as far as I'm aware anyway. This guy deals in magic. He is just so sinister and bad, and he's done all these terrible things, and I was really looking forward to go about and seeing him in a live action adaptation. And the interesting thing about Tom Hiddleston's version of Loki is that they give him a much more human side. They make him seem like a lost soul, just a second brother, or the brother that doesn't exist. He always seemed to be the person in the background, standing in the shadow of the almighty Thor. So you obviously empathize with the character and grow to understand why he feels like he is and why he turns to the life of evil. And for the most part, it's really good. Tom Hiddleston does go about and give Loki an interesting side, which I don't think has really been shown in the comics. Though I wish they had shown a little bit more of Loki's sort of magic abilities, because I know there's a lot more stuff that he could do. And for all the bad and sort of evilness that Loki happened to produce in the film, I don't feel he was as sinister or as properly badass as he could have been, like in some of the other adaptations that I've seen him in. But overall, Tom Hiddleston's version of Loki was likable, interesting, and definitely set up the stage for, like, you know, a much more evil Loki when he comes around in the Avengers. Now we move on to Odin. Now, when Anthony Hopkins was cast as Odin, I thought it was just, wow, perfect casting. I don't think I could see anybody else doing this role other than him. And to be honest, it lived up to my expectations. Anthony Hopkins has a presence on screen that is just undeniably awesome. Okay, so now we're going to go about and talk about Heimdall, played by Idris Elba. Now, Heimdall in the film was fairly cool. He is the all-seeing, all-hearing Asgardian who happens to be the protector of the Bifrost Bridge, and he got a little bit of action time as well, so I can't really complain. And the rest of the cast do well in their respective roles. Now let's talk about the actual presentation of the film. Now, when it comes to the visual effects of the film, when I found out that BUF and Digital Domain were going to be tackling that department, I was questioning their power to go about and give Thor this sort of visual aspects that it needed to be great. But luckily, the film does come across as a visual treat. The world of Asgard is really fantastically crafted, and it has a lot of nice things to stare at, from the sky to the brilliant buildings in the background. The water effects and the overall lighting that is used is really interesting. So from the world of Asgard to the interesting world of Jotunheim, which is a cold, dark, desolate world full of ice, snow and death, really. It really comes across as, like, you know, a very lonely place, and it looks really nice. However, I have to mention that for all the good looking CGI and visual effects in the film, the effects seem to come across as a bit blurry in a few scenes, and there also seems to be a slight inconsistency with the visuals and lacks a little bit of clarity that you'd see from other visual effects artists such as Industrial Lights and Magic. But overall, the visual effects still look pretty good. Now, in terms of the sounds of Thor, the interesting thing about Thor in this department was the soundtrack, which is crafted by Patrick Doyle. And to be honest, his soundtrack is pretty good. There is a lot of interesting sounds in here, which are heartfelt and enjoyable, uplifting and powerful. So now I'm going to talk about my enjoyment of the film Thor. I thought Thor was wicked. It was probably Marvel's best film since Iron Man #1, and that's saying something there, because Iron Man 1 for me was just totally sweet. I saw that 3 times in the cinema and I loved it immensely. The Incredible Hulk was more like the Adequate Hulk, which had like an interesting first half but sort of just got really bad towards the ending, and I just didn't like it all that much. And Iron Man 2 just felt like a cluttered mess, which had some interesting elements in there, but overall just did not rise to the occasion of being the sequel that people had hoped for. Overall, the film is still pretty good, and I'd say while it's not as good as Iron Man, it's probably still the best film since Iron Man #1. Overall, the action was pretty good, the characters were interesting and well balanced out, and for the amount of characters that they happen to have in the film, I thought that they were all balanced out and had enough stuff to say. While the Warriors 3 felt like they needed a lot more screen time to be fully developed, overall I enjoyed them immensely. So overall, I'd rate Thor about 8 out of 10, possibly 8.5. It's probably going to be an 8 though. While it's definitely not the best of the Avengers Initiative films, it's probably the second best out of the 4 films that's out at the moment, soon to be 5. But yeah, Kenneth Branagh has proved the impossible, that Thor could be adapted into live action, and I definitely hope that he shows up for the sequel, because it would be a shame to get rid of a man who helped craft a very interesting world in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So yeah, that has been my review of Thor. Hopefully you found this review fairly informative, and yeah, drop me a line and tell me what you thought of the film, whether you liked it or whether you didn't. So yeah, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Hypersonic 55 signing out.